I remember opening Twitter in 2015 and seeing the riots in Baltimore, Maryland of people protesting the wrongful arrest of Freddie Gray. I remember him being denied support for his asthma inhaler as he tried to catch his breath. I remember the quote-unquote rough ride provided to him by police officers, which led to his ultimate and untimely death. And I remember the anger I felt when he was denied support for his asthma, and how, as a Black man with a developmental disability, he wasn't given a fair chance. When we fast forward to 2020, in the height of the pandemic, after the unjust killing of George Floyd, companies decided to switch gears to incorporate more DEI work with hopes to break down barriers and create safe spaces for everyone. With this initiative to be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, companies began to have conversations surrounding race and the LGBTQIA+ community. However, they failed to include conversations that included people with disabilities, both seen and unseen. In order for us to create a more inclusive society, we must recognize that that means serving people with disabilities, and that work begins inside the classroom. Hi, I'm Ariel Brooks Porter. I am a Black woman. I'm a Black educator. I'm a Haitian American. I am a daughter. I'm the youngest of 7 children who grew up in the small outskirts of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm an alumnus of the illustrious Delaware State University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in psychology. And I'm also an alumnus of Relay Graduate School with a master's in education. I entered into the field of education eager and excited on the east side of Wilmington, Delaware. I was excited to enter into the classroom so that I could finally become the teacher that the little Black girl in me once needed. And so, of course, I became her. However, my eagerness and optimism wasn't enough to get the job done, as I soon found out that I had my work cut out for me. In my first year as a lead general education teacher, I worked late nights and early mornings, internalizing and prepping lessons to deliver to my students day in and day out. While I internalized these lessons, I still found it hard and challenging to understand why I couldn't move the needle for one of my most vulnerable students. For the purpose of this talk, we're gonna call her Rain. It wasn't until my first individualized education plan meeting for Rain where I learned the intricacies of special education, and I recognized the lack of knowledge, preparation, and skill I had to best serve my most vulnerable students. You see, Rain was a student with a developmental disability. So while she often came to school excited to see her friends, her peers, to see her teachers, she consistently found it hard to focus in class and was often hyperactive. Rain was a student with ADHD. And so it wasn't until my first individualized education plan meeting for Rain, or my first IEP meeting, where I realized that I was ill-equipped with the tools to best support her inside the classroom. And throughout my career, I've made it my job to learn the skills, strategies, and tools to best support her and students like her inside the classroom, because all students deserve access to high-quality learning. Some of these skills that I learned came through trainings for restorative practices. It came through courses for universal design for learning, so that I could provide access to rigorous curriculum for students inside my classroom. It also came through completing programs where I learned about special education laws, where I learned how to write an individualized education plan or an IEP, where I learned how to read an individualized education plan, and where I learned to implement strategies, scaffolds, and accommodations for students so that they can have access to learning no matter how they learned. And so in turn, this looked like incorporating things like dance breaks in the classroom so students could have opportunities to get their wiggles out, have fun, and engage in meaningful relationship building with their peers. This also looked like inviting community members, community stakeholders into the classroom to teach students what it is to be like to grow outside of the four walls that they've seen every single day. It looked like incorporating different accommodations to cater to students' sensory needs so that they could have access again to this high quality learning. And it wasn't until I started to implement this into my classroom that I actually began to see growth. You see, when I started to differentiate learning and meet each student where they were actually able to succeed. And now, while I incorporated a lot of these things for students in my class who learn differently, the reality is that ADHD manifests differently for every student. And so while some of the things I did in my classroom worked, it wouldn't work for everyone, and that's okay. There's a number of different strategies, tools, and skills that we could learn to best support learners everywhere inside our classrooms and inside society. Because everyone learns differently. And despite those differences, everyone deserves access to high-quality learning. However, understood.org outlines that currently the outcomes for people with disabilities are poor. 1 in 3 students with disabilities get held back at least once while they're in school. Students with disabilities enroll in college at half the rate of their peers. 50% of students with disabilities grow up to be unemployed, and 1 in 2 students with disabilities become involved in the criminal justice system. You see, the reality of this is that students with disabilities, they grow up to one day be adults with disabilities. And it's our job to recognize that it takes our ability to change the outlook on people with disabilities. And so I'm going to challenge each and every one of you here today. Educators, I'm challenging you to advocate. Advocate for more high-quality training in your school so that you're provided the opportunity to provide access to students with disabilities and students who learn differently. We know that everyone makes progress when they have an opportunity to learn in the ways that they're able to. Parents, I'm urging you. I'm urging you to get involved with your local organizations and learn more about people and students with disabilities, because the reality is when you walk into society, you will encounter people who learn differently, and they deserve grace. Peers, classmates, I urge you to understand that each person learns differently. And despite the fact that everyone learns differently, everyone deserves access to high-quality learning. Community members, council members, I urge you to advocate for more funding so that schools have the opportunity to provide teachers with high-quality learning. I urge you to provide funding for schools so that teachers like me can provide access for students with disabilities, both seen and unseen. I'm standing here right now in a room filled with people with diverse backgrounds. And while we have diverse backgrounds, each and every one of us is charged with changing the outlook on disabilities and how that manifests for people and how we support them in our society. Each of us has a role to play. And so as you leave this space and as you exit today, I'm challenging you to play yours. Thank you.